444 313 Again, you can call, text, or use WhatsApp. I'm going to start with, as always, what is the Grail message? The Grail message, in the light of truth, by Abdrushin, is a spiritual knowledge of life. It offers an explanation of the world, a picture of creation on the basis of natural laws. Its lectures contain valuable basic elements as a help in life. For through the knowledge mediated, the reader is again brought closer to life and led back to God. The Grail message deals with important fundamental questions of life by explaining in a clear and logical way the automatic working of the laws of nature, the whole weaving of creation, allowing every process to be recognized and thereby the purpose of our whole life. It is directed at the individual and speaks to the innate experiences of the human being, their strengths and weaknesses. Thus, every reader has the opportunity to discover, through the intuitive perception, if what is stated is the truth. Combining with matter-of-fact reasoning, a complete world picture arises, where there is no separation between the visible world and the great world beyond the five senses, nor any separation between scientific and religious striving for knowledge. I'd like to give you a couple of quotes from the author of the Grail message, Abdrushin. The hearer and reader of my lectures should always work within himself, keenly probing and building bridges from one lecture to the other, as well as out into the great and small world happenings. Only then will he be able to understand the Grail message and find that it gradually shapes itself into one complete whole, without leaving any gaps. Again and again, in all the happenings, the reader will again come back to the basic features. He can explain everything without having to change even one single sentence. The word of the Grail message lives, so that it permits only those people who really carry the honest desire in their souls to find abundantly. All else is automatically rejected by it. For the arrogant and those who seek superficially, the message will remain the book with 7 seals. And I'd like to finish with another quote from the author. I wish to fill the gaps, which have so far always remained unanswered in the souls of men, and which never leave any serious thinker in peace, if he earnestly seeks for the truth. So, dear listeners, just to remind you again, the topic for discussion tonight is the fall of humanity. And you can join us with any questions or comments. The number to contact us here in UK, it is 079 444 313 66. You can call, text, or use WhatsApp. And if you're outside of UK, it is 0044 79 444 313 66. Brother Gregory, I'm going to start with a reading from the Bible in the Old Testament in Genesis chapter 3, because that's what this topic tonight is all about, or well, we're focusing on it, let's say, and I just thought it's good to remind everybody about the story. Just excuse me a second, I'm getting a call, and let me see who. Hello? Good evening. Yes? Okay. Okay. You can't hear us. Okay. Thank you for letting me know that. Thanks a lot. We'll sort it out. Thank you. Bye. Sorry, listeners. Apparently, we are not live on air. I'm going to just play some ads while we do sort that out. Just hold on a second. Okay, it's not quite working like I would like it to. So just hold on, listeners. Apologies for this problem.
Our own banqueting suites, police our own communities, and stop knife and gun crimes. Give £1 or more per week to the Bade Fund. Please give generously today, and remember, our children and grandchildren's future is our responsibility. The Bade Fund, our future is our business. To contribute to the Bade Fund, go to www.baedfund.co.uk. So that's www.badefund.co.uk. Click on Donate Now, where you will find the details, or click on the PayPal section in the header box. The Bade Fund, the Bade Fund, the Bade Fund, the Bade Fund.
Many more will have to die. Don't ask me why.
Hello, listeners. This is Bless Radio. Hopefully you can hear us now. We had an issue with the broadcast computer, so now we're live and we're going to restart the program. This is Saad in the studio in London, and I'm just trying to connect with Gregory. Hello, Gregory. Are you there? Just joining. He's in Sweden. Hello, Gregory. Are you there?
Yeah, hello.
Okay, welcome back.
Yes, I am.
We're going to sort of start again a little bit, not everything, but we're going to restart now. So the computer is working now. Apologies, listeners, for that. We were not broadcasting live, so we are now live. So hopefully you can hear us now. As I was saying, Gregory, the topic for tonight is the fall of humanity, and we know that is a story from, or the fall of man, as is called in the Bible. So I thought it would be very appropriate to read from the Old Testament in chapter 3 of Genesis, which talks about that story. So here we go. Now the snake was the most cunning animal that the Lord God had made. The snake asked the woman, "Did God really tell you not to eat fruit from any tree in the garden?" "We may eat the fruit of any tree in the garden," the woman answered, "except the tree in the middle of it. God told us not to eat the fruit of that tree or even touch it. If we do, we will die." The snake replied, "That's not true. You will not die. God said that because He knows that when you eat it, you will be like God and know what is good and what is bad." The woman saw how beautiful the tree was and how good its fruit would be to eat. And she thought, how wonderful it would be to become wise. So she took some of the fruit and ate it. Then she gave some to her husband, and he also ate it. As soon as they had eaten it, they were given understanding and realized they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together and covered themselves. That evening they heard the Lord God walking in the garden, and they hid from him among the trees. But the Lord God called out to the man, "Where are you?" He answered, "I heard you in the garden. I was afraid and hid from you, because I was naked." "Who told you that you were naked?" God asked. "Did you eat the fruit that I told you not to eat?" The man answered, "The woman put here with me gave me the fruit, and I ate it." The Lord God asked the woman, "Why did you do this?" She replied, "The snake tricked me into eating it." Then the Lord God said to the snake, "You will be punished for this. You alone of all the animals must bear this curse. From now on you will crawl on your belly, and you will have to eat dust as long as you live. I will make you and the woman hate each other. Her offspring and yours will always be enemies. Her offspring will crush your head, and you will bite their heel." And he said to the woman, "I will increase your trouble in pregnancy, and your pain in giving birth. In spite of this, you will still have desire to have your husband, and you will yet be subject to him." And he said to the man, "You listened to your wife, and you ate the fruit which I told you not to eat. Because of what you have done, the ground will be under a curse. You will have to work hard all your life to make it produce enough food for you. It will produce weeds and thorns, and you'll have to eat wild plants. You'll have to work hard and sweat to make the soil produce anything, until you go back to the soil from which you were formed. You were made from soil, and you will become soil again." Adam named his wife Eve, because she was the mother of all human beings. And the Lord God made clothes out of animal skins for Adam and his wife, and he clothed them. Then the Lord God said, "Now the man become like one of us, and has knowledge of what is good and what is bad. He must not be allowed to eat fruit from the tree of life and live forever." So the Lord sent him out of the Garden of Eden and made him cultivate the soil from which he had been formed. Then at the east side of the garden he put living creatures and a flaming sword, which turned in all directions. This was to keep anyone from coming near the tree of life. So, dear listeners, that was a reading from the chapter 3 of Genesis about the fall of man, of the story of Adam and Eve eating the apple from the tree of knowledge, and the snake which tempted them. And you can see there's quite a lot of consequences from those actions. So Gregory, that story, there's a lot happening there, and I think we should sort of look at each aspect of it and just talk about it. So first of all, this story, Gregory, would you say that's literally how it happened, what is written there in Genesis? Or is there a spiritual, like a fairy tale, if I can use that word, a fairy tale in quotes, not meaning that it's a fiction, but sort of a message, a moral message, you could say. So is that really a true story? That's what I'm asking, a real story that actually happened, or is it some sort of fairy tale to give a moral story?
It is more of a fairy tale to give a moral story, because when one examines this readings very carefully, you find it has been depicted in a very human way, just to make people understand. But they are riddled with self-contradictions. So one cannot just take it as it is to represent what really happened. If you look at the example that the Lord was walking in the garden, and you also look at the example, of the snake being the most crafty, all these things seem to be contradictory. For man is supposed to have been superior to the snake in its development. So if it's superior to the snake, how come the snake is so knowledgeable and to even tempt man? So one shouldn't take it for face value.
Now that you've said that, it makes it very difficult to read any story and make sense of it. And so I think the first job would be to really make sense of what the story really is. So you said it's like a fairy tale, not to be taken literally. So maybe, as I said, we break it down and try to make sense of it. Let's first look at this tree of knowledge, and the fruit it's giving is an apple. Of course, we don't have a tree of knowledge in reality. I think anybody would say that what is a tree that is not of knowledge? There's no fruit, and you get an apple out of it. So what is it meant when we say, or in this story, it is said a tree of knowledge? What is it meant by that?
Well, if you look at these things carefully, you will find the tree of knowledge is mentioned. But what has not been discussed is, where did this take place? Was it here on earth or somewhere else? So these need to be clarified first.
Okay, please do tell us that. Is it then about that where it took place?
Like we said, this is a general story to teach man a particular lesson, and you can take an instance. Basically, if one looks at the development of man, one finds that there comes a period in its development where the instruments which it is supposed to use during the development have been quietly distorted. It is these instruments that are being referred to. The first is the human intuition. The second is the human intellect. The human intellect has its seat in the brain or in the frontal brain, whereas the seats or that transmit to the frontal brain is the human intuition. That reception takes place in the back brain. So one may refer to that as a tree, because when you look at it, something receives some information and passes it on to the other one for use. So that is the process. And if that process is distorted, then we have the quagmire or the difficulties which has been mentioned in the allegory that has been narrated in the Bible.
So, okay, I must say it's not easy to look at what you have just said to make sense of exactly connecting it with the tree of knowledge. But I guess when we go deep into the story, as we know from the Grail message, this is much clearly explained, because you wouldn't think automatically when you think of tree of knowledge at the brain with the frontal and the back brain. But I guess, as you say, it has to be a picture story. I mean, the people in those days probably wouldn't know about this sort of thing. So today, yes, we know about the brain more. So I guess it makes sense more now. But for those people in the early days, when they would be looking at the Bible or hearing this story, it would be something, tree of knowledge would make more sense to those people. So I sort of get an idea of that. So you're saying, basically, there was a distortion in the tool that we have been given, which is the brain, in how we use that brain. So the frontal brain and the back brain not really working in harmony. Maybe that's one way we can put it.
Yes, what one is referring to here, when one discusses or talks about knowledge, to know, one may also use the another term, to perceive. And when perception is mentioned, one requires tools for perception. Here on earth, we have the senses that the human being uses for perception. But what passes that information, that knowledge, like you read, we are talking about spiritual knowledge. That must be anchored within creation or from within the spiritual realm. What passes that knowledge to the human being here on earth for the correct perception, it must come from one's intuition, and it has to be received and interpreted correctly. If, on the other hand, there is some problem with the interpretation or with the transmission from one tool to another, then that completely, encapsulates the scenario which you just read out in the Bible. Because when one looks at the way things are transmitted and the way things are consolidated and the way things are interpreted, if not done in accordance with the rules through which everything came into existence, then we will not understand what is meant.
Thank you for that. Another thing I noticed in that story in the Bible is that there's a good sensing of good and evil, which was not there before. Eve and Adam ate from the tree, of knowledge, the apple they ate. Before, in fact, that's what the snake was telling them, that if you eat this, or telling Eve, if you eat this fruit, you will now be like God, and you'll be able to tell the difference between good and evil, and you'll be like, yeah, basically you can do that. So before that point of using that fruit or eating that fruit, they didn't know what was good and evil. So something, it's like an awakening. They have some awakening or consciousness going on when by eating this fruit. Could you put that, sort of explain that?
Well, things must be put in context. When you read it out, it was quite remarkable that the serpent or the snake turns out to be more intelligent. All right, even mention good and evil. It means the snake already knew about good and evil. In that case, how can the snake now be more intelligent than the human being and is already interpreting to the human being, though they have just arrived here in the earthly plane, and telling them, okay, you know between good and evil. And only when Adam and Eve have eaten the apple, they now know the difference between good and evil. That is why one was referring to it, that it is riddled with self-contradictions. What one may, see in these pictures is that generally we have the scenario where man disobeyed or where man did not follow the rules, either due to indolence. And when you have a scenario where the man is not energetic enough to interpret what has been passed on to it, then we fall into this category of confusion. How, when it is said they were naked, nakedness is, the consequences of nakedness when you find out is shame. So, and the higher a man rises spiritually, the higher the concept of shame. So when you look at the story which has been put forward, it doesn't make any sense. So one has to reinterpret it and say, basically, they were ashamed at what they had done, which was not in accordance. In distorting the instruments which had been granted them, they became denser. They themselves could not differentiate, or it makes it very difficult to differentiate between what is good and what is evil. For if in eating the apple they were able to differentiate from what is good and what is evil, then that would have been an appreciation of the laws through which they themselves came into existence. So one cannot just take the whole story the way it is and say, okay, we have clarity about it. What has happened is that when we have such a scenario, the difference interpreting that which is good and that which is evil becomes very difficult. For if that were the case, they became wiser in knowing that which is good and that which is evil, then they would have known that all the consequences of what they had done would be terrible, and they were going to have difficulties, terrible difficulties in life, because they have violated the rule. In violating the rule, that is not good, that is evil. Whereas in obeying, that is good, which is supposed to help them forward. So, like I said, the interpretation which is given in the Bible is wrong.
That's a big statement, Gregory, and I can see from how you've explained the story that there are things which are not clear in the Bible story, because obviously, how can the snake be more intelligent than man, even if it's the first man? And snake knows more than man about evil and good, which is really makes nonsense. But so we have said that this story is allegorical, and you've explained, of course, when the apple and the tree of knowledge, we are actually talking about the intellect and the intuition, the spirits, or let's say the earthman, on the ability of the earthman having a brain which has the frontal brain having the intellect, the ability of intellect, and then the back brain being the intuitive part, and they have to work together. And here, obviously, as we can see, they have not worked together. In fact, is, like you said, it has been distorted. So what I want to ask, in that story, it talks about the serpent, and you've clearly mentioned that this serpent can't be obviously a real snake or real animal. So what is it referring to there? Because this seems to be more intelligent than the human being.
Thanks. In other stories, the serpent is referred to as Lucifer. That is why Lucifer was able to tell, if you eat this apple or eat from the tree of knowledge, you become like your maker.
And
it knows the limitation of the human spirit, because it knows that the human spirit still needs to undergo development. Whatever is perfect does not undergo development. It is that which is not perfect that needs to undergo development to become perfect. And since it knows that the human spirit just arrived in this area, in the world of matter, and particularly in the earthly environment, it knows that its knowledge is limited. Lucifer himself was sent to help man to understand and how to use the human intellect. The human intellect is supposed to to be used in conjunction with the human intuition. Prior to Lucifer arriving, man basically must have been using his intuition. But there was a need in this environment to develop the earthly intellect. Like we said some time ago, the development of the spirit in order to acquire the necessary experiences and to go back to its origin, the paradise of mind, is only through basically the human intuition. This is the strategic goal. On the other hand, the human intellect is transient, and its function is only for a tactical, goal, to be able to receive instructions from its intuition, and then its role as an executive director is to help to implement what Lucifer had done, is to say, no, you don't have to do that. All right, you use the earthly intellect, is good enough.
Thank you for that. Dear listeners, you're listening to Blessed Radio. It's the Tuesday night spiritual discussion program. The aim of the show is to introduce you to the spiritual knowledge in the light of truth, the Grail message by Abrushin. And the topic we are discussing tonight is fall of humanity, or fall of man as is called in the Bible. We've read from the chapter in Genesis, chapter 3, of the story of Adam and Eve, where they ate from the apple of ate apple from the tree of knowledge through the temptation of Lucifer, or the snake as it's called in the story. And as Gregory's been talking about, that is a allegorical story, not literally true, but it represents how man, the first man you could say, or early man, followed a path where rather you're not really using his abilities that he's been given, which is his brain, in the right way. So we broke it very simply that there's a frontal brain, which is where we have the intellect, and we have the spiritual brain, where the intuition works at the back brain, and it needs to work in harmony. And this story talks about the consequences when Lucifer tempted man to use his intellect in a dominant way over the intuition, and then that led to good and evil, or the resulting of evil, which was not there until that started. Let's say the domination of the evil, domination of the intellect. Sorry. And now there's so much in that story, Gregory. Now, what happened? There were some consequences, as we know, when man, or Adam and Eve, ate this apple, which is using their intellect. God, you could say, gave them a punishment, and it seemed to be a very severe punishment. For Eve, it was. He said that you will have very painful childbirth. When she is pregnant, her childbirth will be very painful, severe. Actually, is what it says there. And for Adam, he said that you would have to work very hard to have food. Really toil in the soil to grow your food, and it would, it won't be. It seemed like you've lost all the abundance, and really that was quite a severe sort of punishment. And it looked like also, and Lucifer also got a punishment, or a serpent, as it's in the story, that he will never. Actually, I've actually forgotten the exact words. What was said in that story? Let me see if I can just find that for a second. It's a curse, something like that. trying to see what it says about Lucifer. But I know he also would be, let's say, subject to like a life punishment. So, Gregory, how come, uh, you know, trying to make a question out of it. Yeah. How did that happen, really? This punishment. What does it mean? This punishment. Let me say it like that. What? Because is it really truly life, like continuous throughout the next generations of human beings? It's just like a never-ending punishment. So, could you just explain this punishment?
Thank you for this particular question. In the first instance, one already hinted that there are great distortions and great misunderstanding. The first is that the Lord Almighty doesn't punish and doesn't curse. That never happened and will never happen. What has happened is that in making their decisions, human spirits or human beings decided to go their way. And in doing that, they now encounter challenges, which challenges will only require that they use their intuition to make, in order to proceed further. But because they are unable to do that, because they have now overdeveloped the frontal brain, you now find that they are unable to move forward. They are unable to find the better ways of living. And that's what causes the severe consequences which they themselves have now inflicted upon themselves. So it is utterly wrong to say that the Lord punished them or the Lord cursed. Such things can never come from Him, who in His mercy and in His grace granted the human spirit the possibility of existence and has placed all that the human spirit needs in creation such that they will develop themselves. So the idea of curse and punishment is completely foreign. What had happened is that the human spirit made their decisions, and the consequences that they then went and overdeveloped the frontal brain. It therefore means the communications between the back brain from which intuition arises. That communication with the frontal brain becomes lessened, becomes thinner and thinner, and therefore they have to struggle, a lot of struggle, to make their way forward in the earthly realm that they have found themselves. In the case of Lucifer, the punishment which has been mentioned was really not a punishment, because his task was to show the human spirits how to utilize the intellect such that it will bring them benefit, not to overdevelop the intellect, but he himself, without patience and without perseverance, set tasks for the human spirit such that only those who are strong enough are able to assail or to move forward or to overcome this task, which to him is good. But that lacks love. For example, imagine a person who is unwell. For one reason or the other, there are others who are not in that scenario and that are very well. So those ones can move forward. The patience and perseverance and understanding in helping those who are not strong enough, that is, those who are unwell. If that is lacking, that is not in accordance with the love which has been placed in creation. So for Lucifer, he himself was not patient and did not persevere to help the human spirit. On the other hand, he put in certain tasks which makes it difficult for those who are not strong enough, such that those ones will be eliminated. So one can see the picture with regards to Lucifer, and also the picture which, due to the lessened cooperation between the back brain and the frontal brain, the struggles which man will now have to go through in order to earn his daily living.
Thank you for that, Gregory. Dear listeners, I just want to remind you can contact us with any question or comments. The topic for tonight is the fall of humanity, and the number to contact us here in UK, it is 079 444 313 66. You can call, text, or use WhatsApp. And if you're outside of UK, it is 0044 79 444 313 66. Gregory, just continuing on what you have said, one thing you clarified very well, that this is not a punishment. The consequences of the Adam and Eve story, where they ate an apple from the tree of knowledge, which we know is about overdevelopment of the intellect. The consequences of that, this is not a punishment from God. It's just the result of their actions. You know, you do, as we know, one of the natural laws we mentioned many times. When you do an action, there's going to be a reaction, and or law of reciprocal action, as we call it in the Grail message. So there's an cause and effect, another way, or what you sow you shall reap. Many ways of putting it. So this is not a punishment, like you said. It's just a consequence of an action, and in this case, a wrong action, and that results in a handicap, you could say, where we are not able to use our spirit is not able to function on this earth in the most effective way as it's supposed to, because this is the tool it has been given has been, let's say, damaged. Now, there's so many questions from this, Gregory, because in that story it also says, this is going to be, I know it's not a punishment, but it says it's like man will struggle for life, for his food. I know this is, of course, a spiritual story, and that's the bit I want to understand. Is this consequence of this wrong action, which is overuse of the intellect or domination of the intellect? How come this sentence, this consequence seems to be like a life? I'm going to use the word life sentence. Like it's like a, yeah.
Well, it is. First, we have to understand these things are right. Life itself comes from the Almighty. To comprehend the activities in life requires the use of one's intuitive perception. If, however, the human spirit or the human being on earth shuts out the cooperation between the intellect and the human intuition, it means it lessens the connection between the two of them, and therefore the connection with life becomes dimmed. That dimming makes it very difficult, if not near impossible, for the human spirit, which is the inner core of man, to function as it should. Therein lies the explanation that is needed. It is, in quotes, a life sentence, a sentence which man has imposed upon himself, not a sentence that has been imposed from out of the love and the will of the light. But in ignoring one's intuition, which intuition connects one with the path to the light, then we have the scenario, the picture which has just been painted.
Thank you for that. My automatic question from that is then, is there any hope for, you could say, redemption or recovery from this situation? Are we just life sentence? We use the word life sentence. Is it like forever? We can never be saved because of this damage that we have done, or the wrong action that we have done?
On the contrary, if man perpetuates the disconnection or the lessening between the human intuition and the intellect, then it becomes a life sentence. If man then realizes that that is the problem, then he should, one way or the other, find a way to connect the intellect effectively with the intuition or the intuitive perception. For that is the only way forward. For the intellect is temporal. The spirit is the living thing that is there. Therefore, if the spirit needs to gather enough experiences in order to continue to develop itself, and there is no cooperation through the tool that it's supposed to use, then the spirit lacks the necessary experiences in order to make progress. So, as soon as man realizes that is the problem, of course he can change it, albeit gradually.
Thank you for that. Now, there's another aspect in this story, which is, people refer to it as hereditary sin. Now, meaning that the sin of the father passes on to the next generation, and so on and so on. Now, we've talked about the sin. Gregory, could you just refer back to what is the sin here, and then we know what is being inherited or passed on?
Well, if one looks or views these things very carefully, you find that the intuitive perception is not inherited because it's peculiar to the spirit. However, the intellect arises from the frontal brain. Because we have that scenario, it is possible that from one generation to the other, or from father to son, or mother to daughter, or we have physical inheritance. So that is what is transferred from one to another, not the spirit or the intuitive perception. For the spirit is different. So you cannot inherit the spirit, but you can inherit that which is made from the body of man, and it is the genes that are passed from one to another, not the spirit. Therefore, we now have the possibility of having greater intellect being passed of one to another. That is the origin. When one is talking of origin, you mentioned the word original. And since that tendency is there, now we have the original sin, the original error, which had been introduced, which is now passed on from one to another.
Now, before this show, I was discussing at the weekend about this topic, and when we talk about hereditary sin, and in this case, the sin is being referred to the intellect, not this. The sin is not with the spirit or the intuition; is the intellect. And the person said to me, "Intellect is you said greater intellect. The what is being passed on is the intellect and is becoming greater." But intellect is not a bad thing, isn't it? I mean, it's a good thing, actually. You need the intellect to live on the earth, to make your home or food or whatever. So what is the problem with the greater intellect? This is what my friend wasn't able to grasp, that he didn't think anything was wrong with intellect.
The intellect fulfills its task faithfully. However, the intellect is supposed to receive impressions from the spirit. If you have a situation where the spirit becomes indolent, or the intellect becomes overzealous, in that scenario, it doesn't, or it ignores the impressions from the spirit, or it receives very little of it. Therefore, its working substance is now within the earthly boundaries, limited to the earthly conceptions of space and time. Therein lies the problem, because the spirit now is left immatured.
Can you say it again? The spirit is left what?
Sorry, I wanted to cough.
Oh,
The
okay.
spirit is left immatured.
Immatured, okay.
Because it hasn't been able to gather enough experience such that it can now evaluate them. What you now have is more that the spirit, which is the long term, for the long term, what it needs to use to mature so that it can go back home, it lacks. For example, you have the intellect being very brilliant in things like manufacturing, things of the earth, in the sciences, it's very good. In doing some of these things, it could be very crafty. But when it comes to patience and perseverance, where is it taught nowadays? Patience and perseverance. The intellect wants to be smart, which is good. But does the intellect wish to be patient? Because the processes in life, they do take time. They do take space. They vary from one realm to another. So here in the earthly scenario, where you have the intellect which does not understand patience, does not understand perseverance, all it wants to do is quick formula such that it can achieve its aim. Therein lies the biggest problem, because impressions sent out to the intellect first are not received, or if received, are misinterpreted. If you look at the scenario of what one mentioned, where you have someone who is unwell, if you now have a scenario where you have an overseer who is supposed to get some work done, and you have some people who are unwell, what the overseer does is, look, I don't have time. Impatient, it wants to destroy those people whom he or she thinks are not strong enough, and it does away with them. But it doesn't consider the reciprocal action from such things, because it is impatient. That is a very small picture. The needs of the spirit are not the same thing as the needs of the intellect. Because whenever you have that disconnection, then you have problems. Because the intellect is transient, only of use to a limited extent while here on earth. Whatever it does becomes temporal. To give a very mundane example, consider music which was when I say constructed or composed years ago. We still enjoy the piece of music, and we draw inspiration from them. Now you consider the telephones handset which we use. The Nokia you used 5-10 years ago, you would not dare to use the same Nokia nowadays. Or the Nokia you used 20 years ago, you would not dare to use it nowadays, because things have changed. So you find that the intellect is only for tactical short term, whereas that which is of spirit is for the long term, like you have in the works of art, which are works or impressions that have arisen from out of the spirit.
Thank you for that explanation and the example you have given, really clarifying, let's say, the difference between the spirit's abilities and also the intellectual abilities, both of which are needed, and but they work differently and in different worlds, and yet on the earth we use them both. And it really, let's say, most of us wouldn't recognize that that's what is how it is, this world is meant to be. That yes, we all know about eating and developing, making new inventions are coming left, right, and center, but then there's another aspect of life, the spiritual aspect, which is completely goes at a different speed. Like you say, it's slow and it's long term, while the intellectual things are more short term and fast. They develop quite fast. So thank you for breaking it down in that way. Now, again, something else about hereditary sin. We say it passes on to the next generation. That's what it means. The body, we inherit the body from the parents, or the let's say said genes are passed on. Now, but there's still a little issue in my head, which is saying, why should I inherit the sin of my parents? I didn't do that sin. That is the parents' sin, and I'm, even though I've born from my parents, why should I suffer the consequence of the sin of someone like parents?
Well, what is inherited is the possibility for, if you yourself will matured enough, then either you didn't need to come back here on earth. You would have proceeded on your journey back to paradise, experiencing the wonderful things as you move along. But because you yourself are not matured enough, you are then compelled to use that which is available here on earth. That means in accordance with reciprocity and the attraction of homogeneity, you are attracted to those parents that you need for your incarnation or your reincarnation here on earth. So one is only granted an opportunity to mature, to experience here on earth. It is not a punishment. If, however, that which is available, you yourself do not wish to partake or to make use of it, then it would be best for you not to ask for that opportunity of incarnation. The free will is always there.
Thank you for that. Now, what about God's, if I can use this word, responsibility? God created us, and you said everything is happened is a consequence of our actions. So, but let's say God knew our abilities, and when He created us, and what what can happen to us, and then yes, you are right. We should find our way back, let's say, to recover our situation. But then it seems, let's say, without God's help, we can't do that. That's what I'm going to say like that. So where does God's sort of interaction come into this? Does God does He leave it to us to find our own way back? Or, to get out of this self, you've made it clear it is a self-made, I don't know, the word problem doesn't seem quite right. It's because it's a life sentence, what we say, how serious it is. So, yes, does God leave it to us to find our own way out, with this disability that we are carrying, or there's a handicap that we are carrying of the intellect dominating, or does He intervene?
Within the scheme of things, that is, within the laws through which every creature came into existence, help abounds everywhere, as long as the human spirit makes use of the help which has been passed on to it. Such helps came through some of the beings or the nature beings which are around. Such helps also come through our conscience, which basically is more or less the intuition speaking to us. Such helps also comes as a reciprocity, be it in joy or in sorrow. These are helps which are to enable us, which are to ram into the spirit and awaken it. Above all, helps that came through the prophets, as long as they are interpreted aright, also helps coming through the love of the Almighty, a personification of that love being Christ Jesus Himself. And now, we have works. In the light of truth, the Grail message, these are helps, but they must be examined rigorously to find out if it will be of benefit. That requires that the spirit must be astir, else whatever has been sent to it as help, it does not recognize it as help and seeks for other helps which are very transient. So one must differentiate between spiritual help, which is strategic, which is on the long run, and intellectual help, which is very on the short run and lulls man to sleep. If it is spiritual help, it's always there. And that is why Christ himself says, seek and you shall find. Knock and the door will be open. These only refer to the abilities of the Spirit. For what we are discussing in this forum is spiritual knowledge. So we have never been alone, and we are not alone as long as we seek for that which is of benefit to the Spirit.
Thank you for that, Gregory. Dear listeners, you're listening to Bless Radio. It's the Tuesday night spiritual discussion program. The aim of the show is to introduce you to the spiritual knowledge in the light of truth, the Grail message by Abrushin. And if you're interested to get a copy of the Grail message for yourself or get more information, you can go to this website, which is www.grailmessage.com. I'll spell that, www.grail, Grail, message, MESSAGE.com. And the topic we're discussing tonight is the fall of humanity, or the fall of man as it's called in the Bible. You can join in the discussion by calling or texting or using WhatsApp to this UK number, which is 079 444 31366. You can, if you're outside of UK, it is 0044 79 444 31366. Again, you can call, text, or use WhatsApp. And we are broadcasting on the website, which is blessradio.org. You can also go to TuneIn and search for Bless FM, tunein.com. You can also go to YouTube and then search for Bless Radio, the number 1, Bless Radio 1, then space live stream. When we're doing the live show, after the show ends, about 10 minutes after the show ends, you can listen to the recording of this show, and you just simply go search again on YouTube, Bless Radio 1, and then look for search again the Grail message and the topic for of the show. Every show has been recorded. The topic for tonight is the fall of humanity. So Grail message and fall of humanity. You can listen to our show at the end of the program after when you finish 10 minutes after 8 p.m. So Gregory, there's so much this topic brings up, we mentioned in that story about Adam and Eve becoming naked, and which was, you said, about shame and guilt of they realized they'd done something wrong, and they felt guilty. So now, so what is this guilt or shame? Is it something you learn, like from a child? People are taught this is wrong, this is right, or it is inherent inside us to know it, that somehow this is right and this is wrong. And yeah, let's start with that first.
Well, wrong and right as determined from a spiritual standpoint, rather than wrong and right as determined by everyday conversation. From a spiritual standpoint, then it means that there are clear guidelines that for one who is very intuitive is able to immediately determine that which is wrong from that which is right, because the spirit is fully alive to these things, even in a local situation. So, because we have in this forum, we are discussing spiritual knowledge. So everything must be looked at first from a spiritual standpoint, because that is the strategic one, which is the long term. So when it comes to shame, you find that the spirit, a spirit that is austere, that is quite active, is able to determine that which is right, and therefore swings in such a way that it will not cause harm, or it will not do that which will return harm to itself on the long run. Therefore, it is fully covered. Whereas that which is not very matured, or that which is slagging, will carry out certain activities without considering what the consequences will be. In that case, it is not fully covered by the law. Therefore, it is naked.
Oh, thank you for that picture. It's sort of, in a very simple way, clarifies really what this is about. So thank you for that. So now I'm going to, and you've said it is spiritual, but since we are on the earthly world, I just want to talk about things which people do. So, for example, no two people are the same. Everybody got their own idea or interpretation of some activity that they're doing or somebody else is doing, and you can say having different opinion. And then, and you talked about the spirit being the aim of our life on this earth, or just our life, is to become mature. So, and there's obviously varying, let's say, I don't quite know how to put that, very varying levels of maturity in every human being as well, or different human beings, I should say. So, and then we can see that some people see something as wrong, and others see it, oh no, it's okay. And so let's say some people, they say, oh, they don't feel any guilt or anything they do, or others, or don't feel shame even. And then so what I want to ask you there, Gregory, is what about these people who's claiming that they don't feel any guilt or shame? Are they different somehow? That they don't feel it? Because at the end of the day, you said it's a spiritual thing. So,
well, you use the word, they don't feel it. Feeling is of the intellect. Feeling basically hasn't gone deep enough. When one talks of deep inner feeling, that is where intuition comes in. Whereas what you just mentioned is mere feeling, which must have sprung up from the frontal brain that is the intellect. So what they are expressing there is that their deep inner sensing has been blunted, so they cannot sense their limitations, and therefore they don't sense or they don't feel any shame due to their limitation or due to the blunting of those finer things. For them, it suffices. But for the one who still has an undimmed intuition, is able to perceive that it is not right. As you will find here in the world, there are many who, being unwell, think it is right to take an organ from another by force because they themselves are in pain. They are blunted to the suffering of others, and they cannot imagine the reciprocity, the reciprocal action by such activities because they are only interested to get well. They don't feel any shame. However, for one who is fully alive, whose spirit swings in such a way is able to consider his or her neighbor very deeply, it will not go into that. It will be ashamed to even contemplate such an activity. So it is not a matter of, oh, I don't feel it. That you don't feel it doesn't mean it's not there. Nowadays, we all have phones and we take them everywhere. We do not see the waves, but the waves are there. And if they have the right connection, we are able, through the instrument, to perceive of the impressions which has been sent across to us. So that we do not see it doesn't mean it's not there. That we cannot feel it doesn't mean it's not there. The intuition would have sent warning signs, not to the frontal brain, not to do that, but either the frontal brain is unable to receive it or ignores it. Therein lies the problem.
Thank you for that, Gregory. Another thing that's happening regularly in the social world, media that we have now, the modern world, people, especially politicians, are target of this, or celebrities, you could say, well, politicians mainly. When the public or members of the public voice their views, maybe that's even that's too much of a mild word. Let's say they condemn a politician makes some statement or doesn't do what some people are not happy with what they've done, and then they seem to they get a hate mail or hateful words, let's put it, not even words but even threats, I would say, death threats and so many things that are going out there, which, let's say, it wasn't expressed like that before. Now there's this modern technology, it seems to be very easy. People can just hide behind it and just say whatever they think they can want to say. So my question is, and the earthly laws don't seem to be able to do anything about that. It's like you can't do anything. If somebody's thinking something or saying something that's not actually doing physical harm, so the earthly laws are not going to do much about that. Now, but you can see morally, people making threats, that's just an unacceptable behavior, even if they don't carry out the threat. So my question is, I mean, do these people? I don't really want to ask the people so much. Is there like people have lost the conscience, or they don't feel that anything will happen to them, that they're doing this action, and is there? Would you say because man is not able to police these things, um, human beings on the earth feel free to act the way they do, in a very malicious and dark, hateful way, and how will this? What will be the real consequence of it? Because we've had a murder in not last elections. I think it was the election before. A MP was killed. With this hateful thing. So yeah, are there any? What are the consequences of when people make verbal and attacks and threats?
Well, it's a fairly long-winded question.
Sorry.
But basically, as a man has sown, so shall he or she reap. One sows not only with the activities you see, but also with the activities you do not see or hear. One sows with the earthly deeds, one sows with one's thoughts, one sows with one's intuition, one sows in all areas where one uses the gift that has been granted to man, which is life on earth, and the senses which has been granted to man. One sows with basically all of these. In the case of the verbal, the results or the fruits of this will sort of condense with the union of others to return to the originator of those who put it in creation. So also the thoughts. Those will come here or hereafter, but in such a perfect way that there is none that will sow a seed and will not reap the seed. However, the earthly authorities have limited resources and have limited knowledge, or they have not been able to go into these areas. Therefore, their responses is based on the dense limitations which they know. But clearly, as a man sows with whatever tools he had been granted, so like a shareholder, he or she would reap, whether it is social media or not social media, whether it's in thoughts or otherwise.
Thank you for that, Gregory. Another thing is, it's a similar sort of question. Nowadays we live in this politically correct world. Anything you say, somebody might get offended, and so you can hardly speak your mind. Otherwise, somebody will blast you. So now we know and you're like, looks like you're being put into a straitjacket. You can't even say anything, and or let's say, which comes across offensive. So now Abrushin tells us, you are free to wander in creation without harming others. Now, so is that really possible? Because, as I say, whatever we say, somebody could feel, oh, you've harmed me. and really, is it really what you're saying may be harmful, or is it the person who hears it, let's say his words here, that they just are too like thin-skinned and not really able to handle life on this earth, because obviously they say that we shouldn't pamper people when you're bringing up children. You shouldn't pamper them or wrap them up in cotton wool so they don't, when you fall and you get hurt, and then you shouldn't be like you just start crying and feeling like you can't recover, because we know that, whatever injury we have, most of the injury you could recover from them. So is it like people can't even take any sort of remark, which I don't use. I was going to say a joke. Maybe some of them may be jokes, but it's not always a joke. It's just anything, and people can't handle it. So, as I say, whatever you say, somebody might say, "Oh, I'm offended," but is it really offensive? How do you determine these things? This is what I'm trying to sort of get at in a way.
Well, the solution, or the possible solution one may contemplate in this scenario, is to swap places. You talk about yourself, you talk about the people, and you say something, and if I offend the people, so swap places. Put yourself in place of the people, and let the people say something. Does it offend you? All right, that means put yourself in such a place where you have some returns. And how would you yourself respond? Does it put you in a straitjacket? That is only a bit of help. That does not mean that man should not talk. But come to think of it, if you consider it rightly, there is so much talk going around that it's like a cancer that spreads with speed. Many things are said without any reflection. It's as if many are possessed by others whom they cannot see, and therefore they say many things which has very little bearing to the facts. And if one is to watch carefully or to observe very carefully, those who, when they say some things to others, if such were said to them, they become so impatient, become so weary, they lack any understanding. Yet they are the first to throw such garbage at others. There is a lecture in the work In the Light of Truth that refers to this, which shows how man should behave. So it is important that we keep stressing that whoever has the strength to pick up the work In the Light of Truth and examine it very thoroughly to find whether it brings help or not to him or her. For it is in such activities that man is able to realize that which is strategic. That means that which helps him or her to mature in order to be able, when it has dropped the physical body, to move forward courageously in order to experience creation.
Thank you for that, Gregory. I had another question sort of following from this, but I'm not too sure if it's worth talking about it now. I mean, well, it's basically for the comedians. You hear quite a lot that they make a joke and and then it is said, "Oh, this is racist," but then they say, "No, we don't mean it like racist. We're just making a point," and then there's a consequence. Either the comedian gets sacked because this, again, in this politically correct world, this joke is not acceptable now. Maybe 20, 30 years ago, it was let's say people didn't think about it too much, but in today's world, it's like this. So my question is really, for the comedians of this sort of in this type of atmosphere, uh, again, do they need to be so cautious, or do you have to just adapt to the world that you're living in? Because, as I say, what was said 30 years ago, that environment doesn't exist now. It could be even, you could call it not even racist, it could be like today, like sexist, because they say, "Oh, this is anti-women, what you're talking," like pigeonholing women in a particular category, that women are like this, or something like this. So the question on this is, when somebody makes, and these are meant to be jokes, not meant to be sort of vicious, nasty, malicious sort of remarks, should we just take account of the world of today, or people should be able to, as I said, it seems like some people are a bit too soft-skinned nowadays.
Surely one needs to be very careful, to be very mindful of the audience that he or she is trying to communicate with. Therefore, there are some audiences which are not strong enough to understand the import of one's speech, whereas there are others who are matured enough and they will see it for what it is. Well, whatever the case, there should be clarity. Let your yes be yes and your no be no, such that there is a very little room for misinterpretation. Misinterpretation not in accordance with the intellect, but in accordance with the spirit. There should be clarity. Many a comedian should first understand the audience that it's communicating with, and at the same time should be sensitive enough to what abounds within that community or that audience for his or her own protection. But in this forum, it is not for one to discuss what the comedian may do or may not do. What is discussed here are the laws through which every creature came into existence. Therefore, each personality must understand that there are returns. How it intends to respond to these returns is left to it only. Whether these returns will help it to mature, to rise high or not. Like we said, or like he said generally, to be or not to be has never been an issue, for everyone wants to be. The challenge is how to be. It is the how to be that one is now linking with the laws or the rules which abound in creation, through which they themselves came into existence, and through which they will have to mature and return home as self-conscious human spirit back in paradise. That is the strategic goal, and that is what man should aspire to, whether in whatever profession man has found himself, whether it be that of the comedian or not.
Thank you for that, Gregory. Dear listeners, you're listening to Blessed Radio. It's the Tuesday night spiritual discussion program. The aim of the show is to introduce you to the spiritual knowledge in the light of truth, the Grail message by Abdushin. And if you want to get a copy of the Grail message or get some more information, you can go to this website, which is www.grailmessage.com. I'll spell that, www.grail, message, MESSAGE.com. And the topic we're discussing tonight is the fall of humanity. You can join in the discussion with any questions or comments. The number to contact us here in the UK, the number is 079 444 31366. You can call, text, or use WhatsApp. And if you're outside of UK, it is 0044 79 444 31366. Again, you can call, text, or use WhatsApp. And we're broadcasting on blessradio.org. You can also listen on tunein.com and search for Bless FM. We also live stream on YouTube. Just search for Bless Radio 1 on YouTube. Bless Radio 1 live stream when the show is live between 6 and 8 on Tuesday evening. And if you want to listen to the recording after the show, 10 minutes after the show, you can go again on youtube.com, search for Bless Radio 1, and then search for under that the Grail message, and the topic, which is for tonight, is the fall of humanity. Gregory, you mentioned about paradise, which is the spiritual goal of human beings when we are fully developed and matured. I just want to really go into that. How can we, achieve that goal of paradise? Achieving paradise is, from where we are today. It's like a long way to go, and looks like we've got this handicap of the intellect, which is very dominant, and it seems. It's a big handicap. So, how do we sort of strive towards this paradise?
Well, there's a first strong expression saying the intellect is a handicap. The intellect is not a handicap. It becomes a problem or a handicap only when all decisions are left to it. Therefore, it means that not all decisions should be left to it. And that is why when Christ was asked, should we pay taxes to Caesar? He took the coin and asked, whose head is on this coin? And they said, Caesar. And then he says, give unto Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and to the Lord what belongs to the Lord. Now, basically, in a summarized fashion, what belongs to the intellect is that it's supposed to execute those fine impression that has been passed on to it, and that it should not be left alone to make all the decisions, even that which appertain to the spirit, which is not that conscious of or not conscious at all. It means also man should be awake from the slumber to which it has permitted itself. As long as the spirit is astir, many of these excesses can be avoided. Above all, there is the need to have clarity within not only the intellect but also of the spirit. The walk in the light of truth, the Grail message, is of the greatest assistance and help in this.
Thank you very much, Gregory. I've got a question from a listener. In a way, we might have covered this earlier, but I think it's best I'll just read out what they're saying. From where did the humanity fall? From grace, out of heaven, the Garden of Eden? Yes, there are about 3 questions, but I think this is the first one, so I'll read that again. From where did the humanity fall? From grace, out of heaven, the Garden of Eden.
Well, if I understand that question correctly, is it from grace? Which grace?
Yes. It doesn't say, it just uses the word grace. Almost like, from my understanding of that word, it's like we had a privilege where we were, and then we did something wrong and we lost that privilege. So, or we had let's say we lived in we had a beautiful place we were, we were, like I say, privileged. We were in a very privileged place, and then we did something wrong and we were, we lost that privilege basically.
Well, again, it is.
And then they said
it is wrong to say we had a privilege place, and it is true that the origin of the human spirit is in the spiritual realm, which all that is beautiful and wonderful. However, the human spirit was unconscious as an unconscious spirit gem. In order to acquire consciousness and self-consciousness, it needed to move out. And for it to move out, places had to be prepared where the movements in creation are slower than the movement from where it has arisen, because in the fast movement in paradise, it could not attain consciousness or self-consciousness. So it needed to leave that its origin to journey far away where the movements are slower, such that gradually it will mature and come first into consciousness and subsequently become self-conscious. Self-conscious in the sense that those talents which has been implanted into it will come to fruition, and those features will now blossom such that it is able to return back to its origin and participate in the fast movement where 1,000 years are as one day. So it was not punishment, but a grace granted to it to mature. Whether it does so or not is now left to it. Again, it is a grace to be permitted to come back as a self-conscious human spirit. If, however, in the process of experiencing it, the human spirit grants so much credence to what it has found in the world of matter and is unable to sever itself because it has so much burden in itself and has attached so much importance to this world in the lower, then the danger exists that in the dissolutions of the world of matter, because it is temporal, it stands that it will also suffer the same consequences, and therefore the experience, the maturity is acquired, are then stripped of it, and it goes back as an unconscious spirit chain. That means its effort has now been in vain, not due to creation, but due to its own indolence. So these are the things the human spirit must consider. It must consider that which is strategic and that which is not. It must exercise its rights because its right is intrinsic. But in doing so, it must look for so much help abounds, and it could make use of that which is available to go back home.
Thank you for that. There's a couple more questions. The second one is not so long. I mean, I think it's a yes or no answer because you've already talked it. Is how are we to understand the human being's beginning or humanity's beginning in the book of Genesis as allegory or or literally?
Most of these things paint spiritual pictures. So one must take them as allegories, and a picture painted in just to present to the human spirit at that stage of maturity, such that it's able to absorb it. Actually, it must be seen from a spiritual standpoint of view. Else it's of no use.
Thank you for that. And the third question is, why the apple? Is the apple... I'll just start that again. Why the apple? Or is the apple in the apple of someone's eye? Is the apple of someone's eye? And if so, whose eye? The Almighty's or our own?
Well, the apple may be taken out and say fruit. So, but
there is a
the
saying,
example or the allegory remains the same.
There's a saying, apple of my eye, sort of fruit of, you're the apple of my eye, sort of like, I wonder if they mean, this is what they mean here, what you see, something, how you see something. So, is it an apple from the eye? In this case, the question is the apple from my eye, the human being's eye, or the apple from the Almighty's eye? So,
in our discussions, we always stress that the human spirit, personalities, came into existence through the laws of creation. So it's only through the laws of creation that many things had to be seen, rather than from my eye or the eye of another person. For when things are perceived as intended through the laws of creation, then that becomes helpful At the same time, one should not tie oneself to considering that the Almighty that give what is necessary for human existence is like a human spirit like us, and therefore things must be seen from his eyes. The picture which has been painted so far with all this, most of the spiritual writings are so limited, for it is impossible to have a picture of the Almighty in the sense of the human spirit. Why? Because the Almighty only exists through his power, through his love, or through substantiality. And substantiality with the will gives us everything. Whereas the Almighty himself is not tied to substantiality. Is above all this. But what have we? We have dragged the conception right down into the mud that unless we bring such the mud, we don't make any effort to rise higher, to have an inkling of that power, of that love, and of that will that runs creation.
Thank you for that, Gregory. We've come to the end of our show tonight. Dear listeners, thank you for joining us, and I hope you enjoyed the show. I just want to remind you, if you want to get a copy of the Grail message, which we really urge you to do, if you really want to really appreciate what we are talking about on this show, you can go to this website, which is www.grailmessage.com. I'll spell that, www.grail, Grail, message, message.com. Gregory, is there anything you'd like to say to the listeners to say goodbye?
Well, I wish everyone very well and the strength to examine the work in the light of truth.
Thank you for that. So, dear listeners, thank you for being with us tonight. We're back again next Tuesday as usual, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. with another new topic. We'll discover that next week. I wish you all a great week. God bless.